As a result of the British Columbia government's design competition for a provincial pavilion for Expo 70 at Osaka, the brainchild of a consortium composed of Cunningham Design Consultants, architect Barry McLeod, and Dominion Construction was selected. The daring and imagination of their plan caught the public with delighted surprise. This was no stuffy replica of exposition style, but rather a distillation of the thrusting vigor of Canada's westernmost province. Everything about our pavilion was challenging, and by no means the least of the problems was the selection and delivery to the site of the huge Douglas firs that were to reach into the sky for more than 160 feet. Impressed by the pavilion's emphasis on our timber resources, the Council of Forest Industries donated the trees from prime stands on Vancouver Island. Since the largest trees had to be 192 feet long with butt diameters of 4 1/2 feet, tapering to 27-inch tops, special care had to be taken in falling them to ensure that they would not break and their bark would remain intact. Some were felled onto springy beds of boughs. Some were carefully lowered with the help of cranes. Once the trees were on the ground, the loggers were faced with the problem of getting them to tidewater. While trees of even greater diameter are often handled in the woods, they are ordinarily bucked into manageable lengths and equipment is designed accordingly. But here, handling such tremendous lengths meant that particular care was taken in loading to avoid breakage. And with the biggest sticks, it was necessary to use 2 trucks in tandem. These were connected by a cable in order to take advantage of the braking power of the second truck on the downgrades. Drivers in each vehicle were in radio communication so as to synchronize their speed and gear shifting. One of the trucks, owned by Macmillan Bloedel, had been part of the Western Provinces display at Expo 67 in Montreal. The whole operation had to be correlated so that the logs would arrive in Vancouver at the same time for shipment to Japan. From the Nanaimo Lakes, from Kaikous, and from Copper Canyon, the logs were babied to tidewater by road and by rail. At Chemainus, they were carefully lowered into the water and then boomed up for towing across the Strait of Georgia to Vancouver. There, a 300-ton capacity floating crane was used to load the 250,000 board feet of logs to the deck of the Japanese freighter, the Ho Maru. The value of this donated timber was in the neighborhood of $50,000. And when we realized that this was enough to construct at least 200 houses, we get some idea of the quantity of wood involved. On the 4,500-mile trip across the Pacific, the Ho Maru ran into a hurricane, and at one time it was touch and go whether or not the deck load would have to be jettisoned to save the ship. As it was, the storm continued to plague the ship, which was 5 days late in arriving at the port of Kobe near Osaka. Here, the problem of transporting the logs to the Expo site was even greater than we had experienced in British Columbia, for the Japanese were much less accustomed to handling such big sticks than our own loggers. By the skillful use of the ship's derricks and forklift trucks, the logs were unloaded and moved to a dock area where they were fumigated in order to ensure that no foreign blight or insects would invade Japan. The workers, protected from the dangerous fumes by gas masks, covered the logs with plastic, and the fumigant was pumped inside. When it came to hauling the logs from Kobe to Osaka, it was lucky for us that a new elevated toll highway connected the two cities. Had it not been there, the difficulties of negotiating the typically narrow and twisting roads of Japan might have been insurmountable. As it was, the Japanese traffic police decided that the moving job must be done at night, when the highway traffic would be at a minimum. They also insisted that motorized cranes be held on standby, just in case of accidents. Walkie-talkies were used to coordinate various aspects of the operation, and once the cavalcade was on the highway, it proceeded at high speed to the Expo 70 site. At the site of our pavilion, skillful Japanese workmen who shared their countrymen's admiration and even reverence for fine wood began the job of cutting and slicing the logs so that they would be ready to be assembled like a gigantic three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. In Japan, one can see great temples and shrines, some of them hundreds of years old, with beautiful pillars made of the trunks of camphor and cryptomeria trees, which are as large as these in diameter, but there is no building using timbers anything like as long as these. Indeed, the British Columbia Pavilion will be the tallest wooden structure in the world. Originally, the plans called for the whole structure, including the interior framing, to be built from Douglas fir, since, among other things, we wanted to demonstrate its structural strength to the Japanese. However, in a land that experiences earthquakes of varying intensities almost continuously, that is swept almost every autumn by ferocious typhoons, the Japanese construction code insists on steel frameworks for all buildings exceeding a certain height. Consequently, the trees are tightly interlocked around this inner core, and the final result will give the appearance of a gigantic sculpture in wood. The interior of the pavilion will be no less arresting than the outside. Recognizing from the beginning that we cannot compete with the much larger exhibits of participating nations in terms of space, every effort has been made to maintain the excitement that our soaring pavilion is already attracting. The entrance leading underground is below a fan-like spread of girders which subtly beckon and guide the visitor inside. In the foyer, a brilliant display called the Time Belt, in the form of a skillfully interwoven panorama, leads us to the present from prehistoric times and stresses this province's adaptation to, rather than a pillaging of, our rather overwhelming landscape. Hand-carved cedar doors, expertly worked by Haida craftsmen using their own unique designs, lead to the theater. There, on a vertical screen only 13 feet wide but 40 feet high, a 9.5-minute film will underscore Expo 70's theme of progress and harmony for mankind, with its own particular British Columbian viewpoint. From there, the visitor will pass into the land area, where he will see the family, its ways of life, of work, and of recreation. Passing directly beneath a waterfall that will be a transparent wall between him and the open central section, he is led to the water area. The area devoted to light is almost psychedelic, a place where light moves and plays in exciting ways. The sky area has also been called the area of the future, and here we will have the spherorama, a complicated system of film and slide projection, making use of some 48 projectors simultaneously, all controlled by punch tape like an intricate player piano, and presenting an arresting interplay of visual images. All in all, visitors to our pavilion, 90% of whom will be Japanese, cannot help but obtain a stimulating picture of our province, its people, and their aspirations. There is not the slightest doubt that the British Columbia Pavilion will be one of the showpieces of Expo 70 and a source of pride to everyone in this province.